online audience can hear as well. So we are here tonight to celebrate Katie Simon's new book, Tell Me What You Like, an honest discussion of sex and intimacy after sexual assault with Leslie Morgan Steiner. Katie Simon is a sexuality journalist whose writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Lily, The Washington Post, BuzzFeed, and Tin House, just to name a few. This includes the anthology of The Anatomy of Silence. A student in the memoir incubator at Grub Street in Boston, Massachusetts, she earned her BA in contemporary storytelling at New York University, East Anglia, and studied narrative medicine at Columbia University. She lives in Texas and can be found online at katiewsimon.com. Simon will be in conversation with Leslie Morgan Steiner. Steiner is an author, consultant, and thought leader on women's leadership, work-life balance, inspirational parenting, overcoming adversity, and surviving violence against women. She lives in Washington, D.C. She recently completed her fourth nonfiction work, The Naked Truth, a memoir which explores female aging and sexuality after motherhood and divorce. Her corporate experience includes The Washington Post, Johnson & Johnson, Leo Burnett, and 17 Magazine. Follow her on Facebook or LinkedIn via Leslie Morgan Steiner or via Leslie Books on Instagram and Twitter. Please give our guests a round of applause.
Hey, everybody. Camilla. Okay, I think I have enough microphones. I think two is enough for me.
Yeah.
So I'm Leslie. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a DC native. I went to NCRC and Murray around the corner. I worked at the Washington Post. And I'm just so thrilled to be at Politics and Prose tonight because it's another of DC's absolute finest institutions. And we're here tonight to talk about a difficult subject. And I want to celebrate all of you for being here tonight and being open-minded to listening and talking. Sexual assault is, unfortunately, common in every country and every culture. Every religious community, every educational community, every family, every neighborhood. It's existed for thousands of years. I mean, probably like since the beginning of time, sexual assault has occurred. But we rarely talk about rape and what it destroys in victims. How to heal and how to heal sexually. And what that means for individual victims. Enter Katie Simon. And this book, and the only way I can describe this book is that it is a beautiful book. It is soft, it's compassionate, it's knowledgeable, and the thing that to me strikes me as being most perfect about it is that it's survivor-driven. And I'm a survivor myself. And what I will tell you is that we are living in a time where it's getting better and better to be a survivor. Because like when my mom was in college in the 50s, if you were raped, you told no one because it meant that you were damaged and that, heaven forbid, somebody might not want to marry you if they knew. By the time I was in college in the 80s, if you were raped, you could tell your best friend and maybe your mom. But now it's different because we've all worked so hard to get rid of the shame around sexual assault. And the biggest benefit to this is that survivors can now talk to each other. And I think it was quite intentional that survivors were not allowed to talk to each other because it took away all our power. Because survivors are the people who understand you and what you've been through, and their experience might have been different, but they're the ones who can really help you heal. And that's why I am so excited about Katie's book, and I've been excited about it for so long, ever since she started working on it. Katie and I have known each other for, I don't know, 5 years.
Years, yeah.
And it's been so exciting to me to see Katie develop as a writer. She's always been a beautiful writer. But this book takes a lot more than your average writerly skill. And I'm just so pleased for everybody in our culture to say that she did it, that she's done it, that she's hit it out of the park. It's an amazing book, a much needed book, and a kind of perfection. And I have some questions for Katie tonight. What we're going to do is Katie is going to read the first 3 pages of the book. They are magnificent. I mean, every page of the book is magnificent, but I particularly love the first 3 pages. And then I'm going to ask her some questions. And then you guys get to ask her questions. And the thing that I would ask of all of you as you're thinking of questions is to definitely think of hard questions, important questions, but just to keep in mind that this is a personal and sensitive topic, and that we want to all be respectful of each other and of Katie with our questions, okay? All right, kick it off, Katie.
Yeah, let's do it. This piece of writing is very familiar to me. Also, hi, everybody. This is from the introduction to the book, which was part of the book proposal, which was started like 8 years ago. So I know this pretty well. It's called We Want More Stories. In the months after a man raped me, I walked past shelves in bookstore after bookstore, furtively glancing at book spines out of the corner of my eye. I was searching not so much for a book as for answers to a burning question. How could I ever have sex again after being raped? I wondered if I would find anybody willing to deal with me and what dealing with my issues might look like. I had a deeper question too, which I felt but couldn't articulate. Would I ever experience sexual pleasure again? It's been over a decade since I started looking for the answers to these questions for the stories like the ones in this book. I didn't know it then, but I know now. It's not just me who's looking. Even today, post-Me Too movement, discussions around sex after sexual assault are largely absent from public discourse. The topic is not often addressed in sexual abuse healing guides, sexual assault recovery therapy, or PTSD treatment. Google sex after sexual assault and the pickings are sparse, singular, and surface level. We're only just beginning to reckon with the impact sexual assault has on its survivors. There's an urgent issue that we've barely addressed because it lies at the still taboo intersection of 2 subjects, sex and sexual assault. The only aspect we're talking about is a fresh definition of consent, especially legally, which is not so much about sex as it is about safety. We're not talking about bigger picture issues like how the Me Too movement itself and the subsequent news cycles are impacting our sex lives. While many individuals escape assault, we are collectively affected by the threat of violation, collectively impacted by the rise in stories about sexual assault, collectively challenged by behavior that perpetuates rape culture. It's not just sexual assault survivors who are wondering, where do we go from here? After experiencing sexual abuse as a child, I struggled to explore my sexuality as a teenager. Eventually, I became sexually active until, when I was 18, a stranger raped me. A month after the rape, before I told anyone or even thought about resources that might help me, I made out with an acquaintance. I knew I was doing it to erase and write over what had happened. I clung to his lips like an oxygen mask underwater. At the same time, I wondered if wanting sex, if acting on my desire, had led to the rape. I didn't know that all of my thoughts and actions were normal, or that this process of trial and error was how most survivors navigated sex post-assault. I didn't know that it would be more than a year before my next kiss, almost 2 years before I let another person undress me. I went to therapy in those intervening years. At first, I didn't even know what trauma was, the emotional and psychological distress that follows an unspeakably painful experience. Once I found my footing, my therapist and I went through seemingly every aspect of rape recovery: trust, self-esteem, soothing panic responses, recovering rational thought. However, we never broached how sex might be different for me now because of my trauma history. I was left with unarticulated questions. How might my history, especially the recent rape, impact my desires, my self-worth in romantic relationships, and my sexuality? How might my views on consent, masturbation, and casual sex change? I knew sexual assault affected all this and more, but how too did other pre- and post-trauma factors play into my sexual present? As therapy wound down, I started seeing David. Because it was not something that came up in therapy, I still navigated sex with him mostly through trial and error. I paid the most attention to what the cultural conversation told me was important: consent. I was so focused on consent, on boundaries, essentially on trying to prevent another rape, that I decentered my own pleasure during sexual experiences. I considered sex that left me safe but unsatisfied to be good, if not the goal. I put thought into what communication I wanted and into making sure I was with a partner who would respect my boundaries. It was my first brush with a bigger lesson. The rules of sex and relationships popular today can prove less important to sexual assault survivors who must deal with the impact that trauma has on us. At the time, I thought my experience was mine alone. It would be years before I realized that what I felt in isolation was actually normal. Part of my drive to write this book was to introduce a new lexicon, similar to the dissemination of therapy speak, the language of trauma-sensitive dating, which anybody can learn. Something else made its way into my considerations slowly but surely: my body. Sex for a survivor can lead to unpleasant outcomes, including a panic response, avoidance, or removing oneself from the situation, dissociation, or feeling mentally disconnected from one's body, and attempting to please one's partner out of rational or irrational fears. Fight or flight, freeze and appease. For me, it often led to a trapped, frozen panic response. Tens of millions of people across the United States experience sexual assault, and 94% of survivors experience symptoms of traumatic stress. These symptoms, such as decreased trust, anxiety, powerlessness, and depression, may affect our sex lives. While the experience of panicking is in itself disruptive, for me, it opened up yet another can of worms, explaining my panic in a way that might yield a healthy response from my partner. It's difficult to talk about the symptoms of PTSD and the fallout of trauma without talking about the details of the trauma itself. It was through eventually finding a compassionate sex partner that I learned what I needed from one. But in today's challenging sexual climate, not all of us come across a partner who responds in the way we hope. In fact, a less than compassionate sex partner may have led you to search, like me, for a book that addresses these struggles. Many of us don't really know what to look for in the people we have sex with, especially when it comes to navigating trauma. If our sexual partners aren't as in sync as we'd like them to be, and our therapists are skirting the subject, the only way to navigate sex post-assault is by learning from the experiences of other survivors. It's difficult to broach the topic of one's own sexual assault, but perhaps even more difficult to discuss the impact of trauma on one's sex life. Yet keeping these conversations behind closed doors can actually harm the tens of millions of people with trauma histories.
Bravo, Katie. So Katie just read 3 pages of a book that's over 200 pages. And there was so much in those 3 pages. I mean, it's just an incredible accomplishment. I want to go back in time and kind of have a big picture view and ask you my first question, which is, how and why did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Oh,
Think about that for a second while I pick up your your flyers. When did you know you wanted to be a writer, and how did you know?
Well, I really do think I started being a writer when I was 4 years old, and I was writing just my name. It was like memoir writing, but like literally just my name, because that's the only word I could spell. And I do think that is kind of true, but ultimately I realized that I wanted to like work as a writer when I realized I had the opportunity to tell stories that were not being told. And this book is sort of journalism, sort of qualitative research. There's a lot that went into it that's not just writing. And I think that's my favorite thing to work on when it goes beyond just storytelling. Like storytelling is sort of the core of everything I do. But like, how do we build on that and more effectively tell the story?
And could you tell us a little bit about the process of writing this book and getting the book published? Because it was quite a journey in its own way, and it did take more than it took years.
Yeah, I think like just an overall theme through the whole process was that people really don't want to have that conversation at the intersection of two taboos. Like that is so hard to get people to have, especially like professionally, like publishers, agents, like getting people to kind of embrace this topic has been challenging. I mean, it's even challenging in the publicity. This book got like great publicity from like even like Oprah Daily. I feel like Oprah is like the biggest person. So this book has done really well, but I'm kind of introducing a new topic into the world a little. The little that existed when I started working on this sort of about this issue was very top-down prescriptive. One book I remember even said there's only, or all sexual assault survivors want the same thing out of sex. And I was like, that's just so obviously not true. So there just wasn't that much out there. So for me to introduce this whole like bottom-up survivor-oriented way of talking about this unspoken issue, it was challenging. But it all kind of moved forward, and I loved when I finally got to actually work on the book, like start researching and writing. I did a little of that before I sold the book proposal, but to really be able to embrace that like changed my life. So I hope it comes through in the words on the page.
The book has gotten really terrific publicity. In addition to what you mentioned, it's been excerpts and other things that you've written related to the book have been in Playboy and Vogue and The Cut. Were you surprised, or was your publisher surprised that a subject that is difficult and that most people don't want to talk about has gotten such terrific publicity?
Well, I think this is, so when people say my book is niche, that's definitely true in a sense, but at the same time, the percentage of the population that has experienced sexual assault and who is dealing with these issues is very, very high. That's like barely even a minority. So it didn't shock me that it's a little lower stakes to publish an article about something than a book. So I was happy to see that publications were willing to kind of go there with me a little bit and test the waters. And I hope that's a building conversation that more and more people will be involved in.
So you said to me that you expected the writing and research process for you to be triggering. You know, it's one of the things that's so amazing about writing a book is that it's just you and the book for a long, long, long time. It's really private, and you really can protect yourself, but it also can be really triggering. So did you find it to be triggering yourself?
So that's what's so interesting to me. I didn't know what to expect. And instead of it being triggering, I found those interviews and conversations with people to actually be kind of steadying and normalizing and validating of my own experiences, even when they were not saying like something happened to them or they do something that's exactly true of me. Just the fact that they were being open about this topic was sort of comforting to me almost. And I was very kind of hopeful through the whole process. You said something, I forget what I was going to say.
You know, was it triggering? Was it what surprised you most about writing it? In a positive surprise.
Well, a positive surprise actually was how needed it was, because sexual assault survivors were talking to me very openly and didn't really have an incentive to say this, but they pretty universally were in support of there being this book, there being more stories of them, real people, real survivors dealing with these real issues. And I was happy to be able to provide that. My hypothesis going into it, or like maybe 8 years ago, I think, was that I had done a lot of trauma therapy and found it to not help in this way at all. And I figured people would say, like, oh, what I really wish there could be is trauma therapy that addresses sex directly and like that really helps. But nobody has said that. Everybody just wants to like be in conversation with other survivors. So that kind of turned out great for me.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. Why do you think survivors mean so much to each other?
Well, sexual assault and trauma are really isolating, like sort of naturally isolating. So to spend time with and be in conversation with and get support from people who can empathize, that have been there, like that is kind of distinct from like even like your best friend or your parent or something that maybe like means well but isn't totally sure how to navigate something, whereas they've been there. This other person has like done it before. And with something like sex after sexual assault, where there aren't many resources or like therapists are not actually trained in sex after sexual assault and trauma therapy and many kinds of therapy, even in sex therapy, there's very, very, very little about this. So those conversations there's not like a safe space to have them. It's really more about talking to each other and learning from each other's trial and error experiences that hopefully one day we have more help with. But in the meantime, like survivors are coping.
I mean, did you guys hear what Katie said, that sex therapists are not trained in how to help people reconnect with their sexuality after assault? It's incredible.
Yeah, I've talked to one sex therapist that said her training had like an afternoon, but it was about like how trauma works in your body. It wasn't really about like how to help people have sex after sexual assault. It's just really not talked about like at all.
I feel like one of the most incredible things about connecting with other survivors is that they're just like in the flesh proof that you can survive and that it doesn't kill you and it doesn't maim you, and that there's so much hope in seeing other people and so many ideas, because everybody deals with trauma and recovery differently. So it's on a very practical level. It's very important.
Yeah, and I even, I think I can remember the first person after I was raped when I was a teenager who I learned had been sexually assaulted, who was in like a stable relationship, and it just kind of opened my eyes to like, oh, that is a possible outcome for me. Whereas when it's all just sort of in theory, it's easy to think like, well, I feel super alone now, so I'll feel super alone forever.
I think that sexual assault, like a lot of different kinds of violence, but particularly violence against women, people don't think very deeply about it. And they make assumptions. And I mean, one of the first books that I read about sexual assault that changed me forever was Alice Sebold's Lucky. Yeah. And it was the first time I ever felt like, okay, I can survive and be normal after this. Like everybody, the message I'd gotten collectively from our society was, don't talk about it. It's so shameful and you're going to be ruined forever. And so I think that's one thing that survivors really show us, is that that's not the way it is. Something that's really elucidated in your book is what you just said about how isolating it is to be a victim, and how sexual assault affects so many of us, even if we weren't the one who was sexually assaulted. If it's a member of our family, if it's a child, if it's a sister, a brother, a parent, the whole ecosystem of bystanders. Not only do sexual assault victims don't get the support and the knowledge that we need to recover and to rediscover our sexuality, but our whole community isn't educated at all. And I wish that people thought more about what it really is like. to go out in the world again afterwards and say, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm not going to let it ruin my life or ruin my sex life. I'm going to find a way forward. And then to have no help and to have no experts. And it's why it's so important to talk to survivors and why it's so important that their stories are in here. Was there anything from particular survivors you talked to that really surprised you, that made you look at the issues differently?
I mean, yeah, I think a lot. I think so. The way this worked is I sort of represented the survivors like as they came to me, and if somebody never spoke about some issue, then it didn't make it into the book. And then if people had an experience that they shared about, the same thing, and another person disagreed, instead of like choosing a side and saying one was better, I just included both. And sometimes I included like 7 perspectives. And that was really intentional because I'm not trying to say like there is like one path forward. It's more like you are empowered to choose your own path forward. And you can learn from other people and get help from other people, but you don't have to like literally follow one person. That's also why I did the book in chapters by subject and not chapters by person, so that it would be less like I affiliate myself with this one person's trajectory and more like when it comes to this issue I'm facing, what are some ways to approach it?
So, something that I thought a lot about when I was reading the book was what it must be like to be on the other side. So, somebody who is dating someone who has been sexually assaulted and is recovering. What do you have any advice to those people?
Yeah, that is like super important. I think most survivors that I interviewed, when I sort of asked them about who was really impactful in this realm in their life, it would always be a partner or a former partner and never be like a therapist or a best friend or something. It was always sort of the impact of actually trying things out with another person. And those people don't have to navigate blind. They can read the book. Or also just really keep in mind, like, it's okay to ask, and like you should ask. If you're dating someone that said, I've been sexually assaulted, it's okay to ask them, if they have any needs related to that, or if like you need to talk about boundaries differently, or like it's okay to have a conversation. I also in general found survivors would do this cool thing, like to disclose their own trauma history to a partner. A lot of them used examples from the media, or like one person in particular used the docuseries Surviving R. Kelly, and they had not been able to explain what happened to them, to their partner, but through the use of an example that sort of validated their own experience, like just right off the bat, they were able to share their trauma history with them. So I think using resources like pop culture stories and like books and movies and TV, and I guess I'm saying it twice, but like this book, to point to something and say, something like this is happening to me, or like this is a challenge for me, or can we talk about this? I have something to tell you about this. And that's something partners can do for survivors. Sometimes both people are survivors. So those conversations are really important. And I think where a lot of people are experiencing the most growth and change and validation is from their partner. So that person's role is really important.
If someone discloses to you that they were sexually assaulted and they're working on their healing, I know there's not a right or wrong, but what would you think survivors would most want to hear?
From
a partner. Like, so I say, I need to tell you this. I was sexually assaulted. I've had sex since then, but I'm still working on it. What would help me the most to hear?
What actually I think would be the most helpful would be for the partner in this case to ask, like, what do you need right now, instead of saying something validating or saying something like, I believe you. I mean, those are nice things to say, but maybe that person told you that story for a very specific reason, and it's maybe more helpful to ask them what the reason was than to like generally respond. I think I see it as more of a conversation than a sort of one-off, like somebody says something and somebody responds in the moment. Because these conversations are ongoing and like continue throughout the relationship. It's very unusual that it would be a one-time mention. Although I did interview somebody who never told their partner, and we talked over the course of 5 years, I think, and she, at the last conversation, she had never told her partner, and they were about to get married, and she was not planning on telling her partner. So that's what I mean. There's such a diverse range of what survivors actually want, that rather than assuming like any one thing, I think, not saying something bad, but mostly like asking questions.
So somebody could say, I wanted to tell you, but I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, people do that a lot, I think, based on what I've learned.
How to support friends and family who've been sexually assaulted? Do you have pointers for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was helpful to survivors that I interviewed when it came to like how their friends and family could be supportive was just of like understanding that goals might be different for dating, or like sexual related stuff might sort of be happening for a reason that you might not expect. For example, like there was a woman that after a long-term abusive relationship got into a rebound relationship that was very just like sex, and like not somebody that really like mixed well with her life or whatever. She just wanted to reconnect with her sexuality in a positive sense, but all her friends that didn't know about the abusive relationship said, like, this guy is not good for you. Like, why are you wasting your time with him? Why do that? But like, that's why these open conversations, like saying to, like, thinking, if you're the supportive person, thinking to yourself, like, this is sort of different and I don't understand why they're doing that, instead of judging it, like having a conversation about it, because there's usually an explanation.
One of the things I hear you saying is that the survivors themselves have to be respected, and they're the ones in charge of their own recovery. And what I have found myself is that... Cheers. Is that people, sometimes well-meaning, but sometimes not well-meaning, will express pity for me. And that is a really hard thing to deal with. So have you had that experience, and do you have a good response?
Yeah, I think the first time I wrote about being raped on the internet was in like 2016 or something. And so a lot of people I have interacted with since then already had seen my writing about it or knew about this, and would, maybe have like a pitying response or something, instead of engaging with me on the level of like, oh, I enjoyed reading it, or that was like a good piece of writing, or like, I'm glad you published that, I sent it to somebody else. Like anything that's sort of like positive. Like, I think people think sexual assault and then think, oh, I shouldn't have anything good to say because that's bad, and I don't want to seem like a person that like said like a joke about a bad thing or something. But yeah, I don't enjoy that response.
I think people are trying in their own way to be helpful, but it's really condescending. And I could see, with the example that you cited about the woman who was going out with somebody who didn't sort of mix in her circle, but she was rediscovering herself sexually, that somebody might think that they're meaning well and say, is that really healthy, or should you do that? And I think it's something that we need in all topics of our life, but particularly in this one, is for people to just treat other people with like they're the experts of their own life.
Yeah.
And experts of their own healing.
And I actually like talk a lot about that sometimes when people ask why there aren't therapists or researcher like opinions coming in about each survivor's story in the book. It is just survivor stories, and why I did that. And it was specifically because I think the real experts in what this conversation is about is the survivors. Like therapists and researchers and, experts in different things, they have like fascinating stuff to share. But when it comes to survivor storytelling and like creating a sort of community conversation, why do you need outsiders to come in when, you know, those people, as I just discussed, are not really trained in this? And so why do you need them to like validate what survivors say? Just let the survivors talk. Yeah.
It's a great point. So I have a friend. I tend to have friends, you know, for decades. It's like if I find somebody I like, I never let them go. And I have this one friend who, one of the things we bonded over was that she was sexually assaulted when she was in her early 20s. She had just moved into her own apartment, and she was sexually assaulted on a date. And she didn't want to admit to herself or to her parents that she'd been assaulted. So she invited the man to live with her. And for months, she called him her boyfriend. And she confided all this to me after they'd broken up, and she eventually testified against him in court, and he was put in jail, which was he was sent to prison for years, which was incredible. But she still calls me or texts me on the anniversary of the rape, the initial rape. And I love that she does that. And it also brings up the subject of different trauma anniversaries. And how do you support somebody? How do you support yourself going through that? And how do you support other people who are going through that? Do you think that it's helpful to acknowledge it or to try to treat it as any other day? Or
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts about trauma anniversaries. To sort of explain what we're talking about, it's the anniversary day of the trauma that happened. To me, the feeling is sort of like being trapped in time. Like you can't get rid of the hyperarousal and all of the negative reactions you're happening without passing through like the day or the hour, or like whenever the thing is. So it feels really bad and feels really out of control. And the thing is, there's actually like a lot you can do to make it better. And over time, those reactions tend to get less severe, like over the years. So like it's all sort of positive, forward looking, but it might feel really bad. And it also might surprise you. Sometimes trauma therapists don't bring up trauma anniversaries because it is true that some people don't have them. And so if you really shine a spotlight on something that they are not experiencing, you don't want to like trigger them into a reaction that they wouldn't otherwise have. So I do sort of get that, but it can take you by surprise. And then anything that you can do to kind of ground yourself in your body and like be present on the day that is actually happening, not the day that is like happening in your brain, is really helpful. And that might mean involving other people, or it might mean going to work and doing something soothing for yourself after work and like being patient sort of through it and doing things that make you just feel a little better, you know, until you make it through, because it does end. Like the best thing about trauma anniversaries is they just stop at a certain point. And it's great. And yeah, so, but if friends and family want to help, it might not look like talking about the trauma on that day. Maybe it will, but for a lot of people, it looks more like, can you just spend time with me doing something distracting on that day? And it's important that we do it on that day and not like any time that week. So it's not necessarily as daunting, I think, to get involved with the trauma anniversary, just because it can be like going on a walk or, you know, something like that.
We're going to transition in a couple of minutes to the audience question and answer, so start thinking about your questions. But before we do so, I'm going to ask you the question that I hate getting the most when I am on book tour. You know, like I've spent years writing a book, and it's lonely and much harder than other people think, and I'm so proud of it. And all I want to do is talk about the book. And people ask this question: what's next for you?
Thank you. I always have like several book ideas in my head, but what I am truly actually doing is I realized early on with these zines that you guys have This is me kind of distilling down some of the takeaways that I think are kind of impactful from what the survivors said in the book. And these are free, and you can actually download them from my website for free and fold them. They're not that hard to fold. They look a little hard. But so I realized I could turn my book into a zine. And then I was like, well, the most important thing to me is to grow the conversation and affect more people. And I have this book now, I have this zine. What else can I do to bring this message and these stories to more people? And there's like a million answers to that. One of them is I'm collaborating on a research study about how survivors are already coping related to sex after sexual assault with somebody at a medical school at the University of Minnesota to get more data, because that is what enables people to do more trainings and then like therapists and stuff like that. And then the other side of that is I actually am now have plans to talk to and sort of train, do workshops, that kind of thing with therapists kind of all over the country at this point, because they are, to them, this book is like tons of case studies and qualitative research they didn't have to do. And I think that can make a big impact, and that's sort of like a different form of these stories. And I'm open to other forms of the story sort of popping up, but I think I'm just not done with this subject matter.
I hear you. Yeah. Okay. Time for questions from the audience. And there's a microphone there, so you can come, and you can't quite see it from where you are, but I can see it really clearly. Right there. Come up, introduce yourself, and ask your question.
Or you can yell it out.
So I'm going to introduce Camilla. This is Camilla Peterson. She is an amazing person, and I've known her for a really long time, and she now works at the Kinsey Institute, which is in Iowa? Indiana, one of those Midwestern states, sorry. Indiana, and she spends about half of her time in DC, so we're very lucky that she was here tonight. Go, Camilla.
I also go bright red whenever I have to ask a question in public. And it segues perfectly to how you ended, actually, because my question was going to be, should therapists be learning, and what should they be learning? Because I think I love the power of peer support, which I think is like one part of the story. It's really interesting that partners are another integral part. It's like, what role do therapists have to play? Yeah. How should they be learning? And then like, what format should it take? Like, should it be a peer who's gone through that experience, who is the best person? Should it be group therapy if other conversations and community are so healing? What does that look like? Tell me more about what you're going to be doing next with them.
Yeah, so I think group can be very powerful with this kind of thing. I will say in sexual assault support groups, it is often like forbidden to talk about sex. That's a rule that is pretty common. So something where it's like a safe space where you're encouraged to have that conversation, that might work really well. I do think therapists should be better trained in this and even incorporate it as part of sort of like any existing trauma treatment modalities, because I think what we are getting right now is sort of the idea that trauma victims may need help grounding in our bodies and like feeling access to like pleasure just in our everyday lives. But the conversation just stops, like dead stops when it comes to like when you add like a partner and you have like a sexual interaction and you like do all of that. And so I feel like that is something that therapists could be directly trained in and address better. And since it's kind of like not all sexual assault survivors struggle related to sex, but like a very high number of them do, I think instead of it being something that survivors might ask, at the end of a sort of therapy whole thing, being like, wait, because that happened to me actually, like I was like, wait, like I don't know how to date, I don't know how to like affect this, and this was like 15 years ago. And she just said, oh, well, just join Match.com and you'll find you're able to date again. And she was a very good trauma therapist and she did a great job with me and then just left it at that. That was 15 years ago. Things might be better now. I personally haven't experienced any therapist that was really good at this. And so I think it's because nobody's being, or I know it's because nobody's being trained. But there's a lot to learn. And I think peer support only kind of goes so far. I think more peer support groups, more of that is great. I think having it be an expectation that when you get help for trauma, it includes like making sure you're able to like feel good and have sex and like move on in your life in that way. Yeah.
Really interesting.
And the therapist,
Keep going.
I was just gonna say the therapists that's why they're inviting me, because they're like, oh, you have so many examples related to that. Like, I'm sure we could learn from you. But I don't envision, like, I'm not a therapist. Like, I don't envision training therapists as a therapist. I envision training them as a survivor and a storyteller and sort of a research, like qualitative research person. Yeah.
Katie, how did you choose the other people that you reported on the book and the stories you shared of theirs?
How did I
choose the other people that you
brought
to the book? And you could have found 1,000 stories and 1,000, but you framed them so wonderfully. I'm wondering how that all came about.
I am not so sure that I could have found 1,000, because I found more people than made it into the book. And the reason they didn't make it into the book was they were not able to open up, like at this intersection. Somebody might talk to me on Zoom for 45 minutes about their experience of sexual assault and trauma and related stuff. And then I would ask one question about sex and they'd be like, well, I'm not going to talk about that. And that happened like quite a few times. And it happened a little bit the reverse of somebody that really wanted to talk about sex, but if you asked if it was tied to their sexual assault experience, they were like, well, no, I think that's like totally separate and different. And so there were more people that I had to not include because they themselves were not drawing the connection. And I got sources I interviewed. Sometimes I posted on, if you know what like Quoted is or something, where you're getting like sort of expert knowledge for your article, but I would just ask for like personal experiences, and a lot of people found it that way. People found me on social media and got to be in the book. People read my work and contacted me to be in the book because it was over many years, so it sort of just organically, I almost couldn't keep up with how many people were talking to me, and then I was talking to them regularly for, it could be like 1 year or it could be like 3 years, or some people were even like 5 years. Yeah.
Did you, do you have anything to say about the difference from how your gender impacts being a sexual assault survivor? Because I know you and I talked a long time ago about trying to get men to respond, and it was really, I mean, you think it's hard to get women to talk about this, it was even harder to get men.
Yeah.
So do you think that is generally true?
There are men in the book, definitely, but I just like always wanted there to be more. And with men, it wasn't that they would talk about one aspect of it and then not want to talk anymore. Men would schedule the Zoom call and not show up, and that happened a lot. And I'm not mad at them. It was really hard for them to send the email, like that is a tough thing to do. I think a lot of that, though, comes down to there aren't that many examples of men being like openly interviewed about like the outcome of having PTSD because of sexual assault. Like there's not many examples for men to look to be like, okay, these are the questions I'll be answering. And I'm actually sort of hopeful that men reading this book will feel more comfortable speaking because they have read some examples. But yeah, it's difficult, and it's something like I feel like no matter what I ended up with, I feel like I'll always feel like I could have done better. But yeah.
Sandy?
Firstly, I think it's impossible to pity you because you are one of the strongest women I've ever come across.
Oh, you're so nice. That's
Yeah,
wonderful. Thank you.
And you blazed a trail. You're far back now, if I can say, and it's just incredibly valuable to many women, whether they've experienced assault or not, but just to see your strength has been really empowering to so many people. But and I hope this isn't bad to pull the lens back a bit, but I'm hearing you've said several times how, you know, it's tough enough in society to talk about rape, it's tough enough to talk about sex, and then to put those two together,
Yeah.
you know, forget about it, you know, everyone's going to shut down. But it sort of says, wow, we're in 2025 and we're still having trouble talking about sex. And so are there things that we can do, or I don't know whether this is in the wheelhouse of where you focus, but what we can do earlier in kids' lives to give them language to talk about some of the things that, I mean, some of the things that you're talking about they're certainly about, they're particularly important in the case of survivors, but they're important to every sexual conversation. And so how do we, are there better solutions or better avenues?
Yeah, I think pretty universally the survivors that were the most open to speaking with me, so the people that maybe would be most open to speaking to other people as well, had more of a grounding in sex education, whether that was from school. I mean, I think it was actually never from school, but from like other specific sources, people who went out on like sort of a self-education journey, or people who were in like a very friendly college group that was very supportive, open about sex. Those things, I think, predisposed people to be more open and have shared language and do all of that. And so to kind of answer your question, I feel like if, you know, as parents, if you create an environment where kids feel comfortable to, you know, the degree that that makes sense, to talk about sex, relationships, and pleasure, and to talk about like the people they're dating, to sort of be open to feedback about that and open to having an open conversation about that, and also to talk to you about instances of sexual assault that maybe are treated as minor and just dismissed, but that actually they should talk about that. I think basically encouraging kids to be as vocal as possible about what's going on with their bodies, it sort of will help them become adults that are able to be resilient and navigate this a little better. Some of that is my own ideas and not like backed by science, but I think that could be kind of the key thing. It's just like having those conversations very early and keeping on having them.
I wanted to answer that question as well. So my most recent book was about female sexuality after 50, specifically this female's sexuality after 50. And there were a lot of people in my life who were really upset with me that I was writing about my sexuality, and they specifically said, "You're poor children." And I had such one of the contributors to my first book, Mommy Wars, is a writer named Reshma Yacoub. And she too likes to write about things that other people don't want to write about. And she said the kindest thing. She said, you know, society puts women in a really tight box, a really small box, especially older women, like grandmother ages, because you're supposed to be like Mrs. Claus, you know, like with an apron and like cookies, and God forbid you have any sexuality. And she said, the thing is, you're giving your kids a 360-degree view of you as a woman. And they might not like it now, but it is a great gift. And I thought that was so wonderful that she said that. And so my answer to your question is, don't shy away from talking about your own sexuality. It's a completely normal and incredible part of life. And it's a good message to pass on to kids. And it's one thing to get kids to talk about their own bodies. It's a whole nother thing, and such an act of bravery and courage as a woman, to say, well, you know what, I enjoy sex too. We're not supposed to do that as women, even though we've come so far. We're not supposed to enjoy our bodies, even if we haven't been sexually assaulted. We're not supposed to enjoy it, and it's a lot to overcome. But I think that kids really notice, and that there's a healthy and good way to do that as part of parenting and as part of friendship and as part of just being a role model. Thank you for waiting so patiently.
Yeah, of course. If anything, I have the patience of Job, thanks to my mom. So Riley Jelinek, and I have have an overarching question, but I think the question specifically as a human sexuality educator, but then also as a previous partner to someone who was sexually assaulted, who had fantasies of assault, and bringing that into our relationship. And so just curious to know more about, like, from the partner's point of view, how to navigate those conversations. Because even as a sexuality educator, someone who talks about sex for a living in my job with young people, college students, I was struggling to respect my partner's wishes and what she wanted, while also coming up and bumping up against my own societal stuff around assault.
Yeah, that is a really, really good question, and I love how open you are with it. I spoke to many survivors who had an interest in having sex in a way that was somehow reminiscent of their sexual assault experiences, or having sort of like rape fantasies, but that more on the like internal side. And when it came to doing that with a partner, the partner had to always be like down. And if that wasn't the case, like then you're not obligated to do something just because a sexual assault survivor is the person that is saying they want to do it. I'm more speaking a little generally because I don't know the details of your situation. But yeah, I think like fantasies themselves can be really helpful. Playing them out in real life might be really helpful and might feel really good. It might not. And so if you're sort of signing up to like do these kinds of things with your partner, then it might go well and it might not go well, and there's just sort of a lot to consider. But I would always center yourself. Like, just because you're with a person that has a lot of needs doesn't mean your needs don't matter more to you. Like, that is how it should be. Like, your needs should matter the most to you. And it sounds like you're thinking about it in that way. And I also know what you mean about like your job is related to this, but then when it happens in your personal life, you're like not good at this. And my therapist actually sometimes will remind me of things. Like, he read my book and he'll be like, Katie, what do you say when it's another person? And I have to say that to myself. So yeah, so I feel you where you're coming
Those
from.
who can't do teach, right? I guess. People say, yeah, thank you. This has been really helpful, and I hope I'm no longer with this person, but I hope that they are able to find your book and find it really helpful. Thanks.
Good.
Well, our time has just about come to an end, and we're going to move into the lovely Katie book signing section. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to just take us home. Is there anything that we haven't talked about? Is there anything more that you want to say?
Well, I do like to give away the last line of the book, which is, "We are not alone." And I think that is very important. And if you have some experience personally or know somebody who's had this experience personally, it might feel really isolating and alone, but like that's not actually the case. And all of the people in this book are like ready to make you feel like that's not the case. And I also like to, I have this copy of this book that I actually ask if anybody during this book signing part, if you don't have a book to sign or you just want to come say hi, I ask people who come to my events to sign my book. So it looks like that on all the different pages, and there's definitely room for more. So feel free to like join the line and do that. Like, no matter if you're getting a book or not, I'd love to talk to you, and I really appreciate you being here tonight. And I hope you tell people about this book who might benefit from it. So thank you so much.